In the small agricultural town of Windermere, 9-year-old Clara Danvers was known as the child who never stopped singing. Her parents said the house always carried her voice, drifting through hallways like something woven into the walls. Every afternoon, she walked home from school along the same orchard path. A tunnel of apple trees arched overhead, their leaves rustling like pages being turned. On September 14th, Clara never made it home. Her teacher confirmed she'd left school at exactly 2:58 p.m. Red backpack zipped, hair in a loose braid. Multiple classmates said she'd been humming a tune none of them recognized. One girl later described it as soft, like a lullaby, but wrong somehow. At 3:17 p.m., a farmer named Wallace Burrow heard a child singing in the orchard. The voice, he insisted, was unmistakably Clara's. But the orchard was empty. When Clara's father found her backpack lying near the old stone well, standing upright as if carefully placed, he felt a coldness crawl across his chest. Clara was neat, but she was not set your backpack upright in a perfect pose neat. Police initially treated the area as a straightforward missing child scene. No scuffle marks, no footprints leading away, no signs of abduction. It looked as though Clara had simply stepped out of the world. That night, officers swept the orchard with K9 units. The dogs circled repeatedly around the well, whining, refusing to go near the opening. When officers peered inside with flashlights, the beam revealed only old water stains and the hollow drop into darkness. Nothing else. But at 11:42 p.m., Officer Mina Calloway reported hearing something she could never explain. As she walked past the northern orchard row, she heard a child's voice humming the same uneasy melody Clara had been singing that afternoon. Her body camera captured the moment she froze. The humming continued for 6 full seconds. Then it stopped, and the orchard fell so silent it felt staged. Over the next week, search teams combed the property. The only item ever recovered was Clara's necklace, found looped neatly around a low branch. The chain was unbroken. The clasp was still locked. The branch itself was no thicker than 2 fingers, yet the necklace hung from it like it had been placed there by careful hands. Investigators labeled this a staged marker, often left by abductors to taunt or mislead. But the forensic team found no fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers, no residue, just metal against bark. The case turned strange on day 12. Drone footage captured during the search was being reviewed in the station conference room. At timestamp 1542, the drone panned over the orchard's central path. The video showed rows of trees, long shadows, and then, just for a moment, a small figure standing beside the well. The figure was slight, the height of a child. The posture neutral, the hair long enough to resemble a braid. But the face was blurred in a way that didn't match motion blur or camera malfunction. Almost as if the image had been smudged before the frame even existed. Technicians replayed the footage dozens of times. The figure never moved. It simply existed in a single frozen frame. In the frame immediately after, the figure was gone. Clara's mother, Dana, watched the footage once. She pressed a hand to her mouth and whispered, "That's her. But that's not her." The Orchard Echo case, as it became known, spiraled into a quiet legend. Teenagers dared each other to walk the orchard path at sunset. Locals claimed the well was cursed. But police officers, those who were there that night, refused to entertain folklore. Until year 4. A newly assigned deputy reviewing archived audio logs found something that had been dismissed as static years earlier. At 2:13 a.m. on the third night of the search, one of the audio recorders stationed near the orchard captured a faint sound, a voice, a child's voice, humming the same melody. When the deputy played it aloud in the bullpen, the room grew still. Officer Calloway turned pale and left abruptly. 12 minutes passed before she returned, eyes glassy, and said quietly, "That's the same voice I heard. Exactly the same." The orchard was searched again. Nothing. To this day, Clara's file remains sealed behind a red tag marked "Unresolved, Active Interest." Her parents moved away but refused to sell the land. They returned to Windermere every September, leaving a small wind chime at the orchard gate. Locals swear that on still nights, the chime rings even without wind. No one walks the orchard after dark, and no one hums in the plains town of Venters Hollow, where the land stretches flat enough to see a storm arriving hours before it breaks. 11-year-old Micah Graves vanished during a gust so strong it rattled the windows of every farmhouse for miles. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, quiet, bright, and unremarkable, except for the wind that began rising without warning. Micah was known for wandering, not in a reckless way, but with the sort of curiosity that made adults keep him within arm's reach. His mother called him the boy with too many thoughts and not enough pockets. He collected everything: bottle caps, feathers, smooth stones, snippets of string. But his favorite thing to collect was sound. Micah carried a tiny handheld recorder and filled it with clips: birdsong, passing trains, the creak of the barn door, even conversations he probably shouldn't have captured. On March 9th, he set out behind the house with his recorder and a jacket tied around his waist. The wind was already picking up, tugging at the grass in long ripples. His mother last saw him heading toward the old fence line, the one that bordered the wide field locals called the prairie sweep, because when the wind kicked, it scraped the land like an invisible rake. By 3:40 p.m., the gusts grew strong enough that neighbors began securing loose items. At 4:12 p.m., the first warning alert pinged on phones. At 4:19 p.m., Micah's recorder was found lying in the dirt beside the fence, still running. Micah was nowhere in sight. Search teams were dispatched within the hour. The prairie was an impossible place to hide. No hills, no trees, no structures. A child could be spotted from half a mile away, yet Micah was simply gone. The recorder became the first real piece of evidence. Investigators played the last minute of audio in a tight circle around a desk. It began with Micah speaking to himself, as he often did. "Wind's talking again," he whispered. Then a laugh. "I hear you." There was a pause, the sound of wind swelling. Then Micah said more quietly, "Okay, I'll come closer." The next sound was the fence rattling violently. Not from wind, something else, something rhythmic. Tap, pause, as if fingers drummed on the wood. Then Micah spoke one last time. "Wait, that's not the wind." After that, the recording degenerated into a rush of static threaded with an eerie pulse, like slow breathing. Investigators replayed the clip dozens of times, searching for voices, movement, anything. The breath-like sound matched no animal in the region. Over the next 24 hours, over 60 searchers covered the area. Dogs followed Micah's scent for precisely 80 yards into the prairie before all traces evaporated, as if he'd walked into a clean pocket of untouched air. The case grew stranger when searchers found impressions in the dirt just beyond the fence. 3 elongated shapes arranged in a triangular pattern. They weren't boot prints. They weren't machinery. They weren't any known tool. The soil inside each impression was perfectly flat, compacted with unnatural uniformity, as if weight had been distributed across a broad, soft surface. A geologist later said the compression pattern resembled downward pressure without directional movement, meaning whatever made them pressed down, but never stepped away. Micah's mother insisted he wouldn't have left willingly. The land offered nowhere to go. No structures, no vehicles, no people, no cover. But wind patterns that day confused the investigation further. Meteorologists analyzed the atmospheric data and found a strange anomaly. A circular downdraft, half a mile across, centered precisely where Micah vanished. It wasn't a tornado. It wasn't a microburst. It was a wind signature no one could classify. In interviews, 2 neighbors claimed they saw something unusual around the same time. Not a figure, not a person, just movement in the tall grass, movement that didn't match the direction of the wind. It moved upstream, one man said, against the push, like it was walking where it wanted. The sheriff dismissed the statements publicly, but privately he marked them in red ink. 3 days later, Micah's father discovered something the search team had missed. On the far side of the fence, wedged between 2 slats of wood, was a strand of fabric from Micah's jacket. Not torn, not snagged. Placed. Folded in half as though someone had tucked it there. Forensic analysis found no DNA. The case stalled until the recorder was analyzed by an audio engineer from the State Bureau. He filtered the static, isolating hidden frequencies. Beneath the roar of wind, layered almost imperceptibly, was a faint pattern of tones that repeated every 9 seconds. Not random, structured. When the tones were converted into spectrographic form, the shape resembled an open circle with 3 irregular lines extending outward, disturbingly similar to the triangular impression searchers found in the dirt. The engineer refused to continue working on the audio after that. His official note read only, "This is not environmental noise." The Graves family held a vigil 1 month later. Hundreds attended. As candles flickered in the dusk, a sudden gust swept through the crowd, extinguishing nearly all the flames at once. Several people claimed to hear a single high whistle drifting across the plain, a sound Micah often used to call his dog. Investigators chalked it up to emotion, coincidence, and the unpredictable nature of wind. But one deputy noted in his private log that he heard the same whistle layered with something beneath it, and that it felt like direction, not accident. Micah was never found. The only remaining mystery lies with the recorder. The final 20 seconds of the file, after deep frequency analysis, reveal something chilling. A quiet, breathy whisper layered beneath the static. Not a word, not a sentence, just a sound. A drawn-out exhale directed. In the lakeside suburb of Holliston Ridge, the Winters family lived in a modest 2-story home overlooking Briar Lake. Their daughter, Zoe, was 8 years old, quiet, gentle, and so sensitive to loud noise that her parents kept soft rugs in every room to dull footsteps. She spoke softly, moved softly, and laughed in tiny bursts, like she was afraid of startling the air around her. For a child so quiet, she adored windows. She treated them like portals to the world, tracing raindrops with her fingertip, naming shapes in clouds, pressing her cheek to to the cool glass to watch birds glide across the water. The last time anyone saw her was through one of those windows. It was November 3rd. Cold, windless. An evening held together by the stillness of early winter. Zoe played in her room upstairs, humming to her stuffed bear while her father cooked dinner. At 5:42 p.m., her mother walked past the stairwell and glimpsed Zoe through the half-open bedroom door. The girl was sitting on the wide window ledge, knees tucked to her chest, staring out toward the lake. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Her mother made a mental note to remind her to close the curtains after dinner. At 5:51 p.m., her father called her name. No answer. He climbed the stairs, expecting her to be lost in play. The door was half open exactly as before, the light still on, her toys scattered in familiar patterns. But the window seat was empty. Her father stood there in the sudden quiet, the kind that presses against the chest. He moved to the window expecting to see her in the yard. Instead, he found the latch still locked from the inside. No footprints below. No disturbance in the bushes, no marks on the sill. Nothing. Zoe had vanished from a second-story room with the window locked and the door open to a hallway where her mother had been walking back and forth only minutes earlier. Panic set in quickly. Police arrived within 10 minutes. They found no signs of forced entry, no hidden crawl spaces, no loose panels, no attic access through her room. A sweep of the house turned up nothing. The backyard gate was still latched, all doors locked. Then they found the first anomaly. Dust from the window ledge, usually a fine film wiped clear by Zoe's constant touching, had settled into a faint pattern. Not footprints, not handprints. Something more like pressure. 4 long, parallel smudges curving inward slightly, as though something with elongated limbs had rested gently against the sill. The marks were clean at the edges, precise, as if whatever made them had been very deliberate. Forensics measured the patterns. Too long to be fingers, too narrow to be a palm, too far apart to match any known animal limb from the area. They resembled impressions left by something neither walking nor grasping, almost like something bracing itself while leaning in. When investigators reviewed the outdoor security camera footage, they found nothing unusual at the time of disappearance. No figures approaching, no movement around the house. But at 5:43 p.m., 1 minute after Zoe was last seen, every camera captured a brief distortion, a flicker, like heat rising from pavement. Except the temperature that night had been below freezing. Inside the house, a second discovery waited. Zoe's mother, searching her daughter's room for clues, reached for the stuffed bear on the floor. When she lifted it, the toy emitted a faint sound. Not the mechanical whine of a built-in voice box. Something else. A breath. Long, barely audible, and unmistakably human. She dropped the toy instantly, screaming for police. Officers examined the bear but found no speakers, no devices, nothing inside except stuffing. But when they replayed audio captured on a body cam during the discovery, the breath was clearly audible. Soft, slow, exhaled with intention. Investigators tore apart the house for 2 days. Nothing. On day 3, a search team canvassing the lakeshore found a small circle pressed into the wet sand. Smooth. Perfectly round. 3 feet across. A shape sightings that looked more poured than imprinted, as if the earth had briefly softened underneath something heavy and unfamiliar. But what disturbed investigators most was what lay in the center of the circle, a tiny paper crane. Zoe folded paper animals constantly, frogs, birds, tiny boxes. But she never used plain white paper. She always preferred colored sheets that her mother kept in a drawer. The crane on the lakeshore was made from a page torn out of a book. The text visible on its wing matched a novel from the Winter's living room shelf. Two problems stood out. The book was still on the shelf, untouched, and no pages were missing. The crane had been folded from a page that never existed. The case stalled until 6 months later, when the Winters family moved away. While packing, Zoe's father noticed something strange. The bedroom window latch, once smooth brass, now bore tiny scratches. Not deep, not chaotic, arranged, parallel, slanted, patterned. The scratches matched the elongated impressions on the windowsill exactly. He packed nothing else from the room after that. The silent window case is considered one of Holliston Ridge's most unsettling mysteries. No logical points of entry, no exit route, no suspects, no evidence of abduction, no physical signs of struggle. Zoe simply disappeared from a locked room without stepping past any door. Some nights neighbors say they still see a soft glow in the window of the empty house. A faint, white shape sitting on the old window seat, watching the lake quietly, waiting for someone to look back. Police have verified these claims many times. They never see anything. But the officers who once worked the case refuse to stand too close to that window after dark. In the mountain town of Red Harbor, winter arrives early and leaves late, draping the peaks in a cold so sharp it feels carved. Families there are used to the sound of snow. It has a voice, subtle but steady, the hush of falling flakes, the soft crunch beneath boots, the distant echo of drifts shifting on the high slopes. 12-year-old Evan Rourke knew those sounds better than anyone. He grew up exploring the trails behind his house, tracking animals, memorizing every fork in the path. He was the kind of boy who left the house with a compass around his neck and returned with treasures in his pockets. Pine cones, quartz chips, even bits of old mining tools he dug out of the dirt. On December the 18th, just before dusk, Evan told his mother he wanted to take one last walk before the storm rolled in. The sky had turned a deep slate, the kind that warns of heavy snowfall. His mother hesitated, but Evan promised he would not be long. He stepped outside wearing his thick coat, boots, and the little compass he'd received for his birthday. He never returned. Search teams found his first set of footprints easily. They followed the narrow path leading behind the Rourke home, up the ridge, and toward the clearing where he often stopped to watch the valley lights flicker on at night. Snow began falling soon after he left, but the footprints remained clear for nearly half a mile. Then something strange happened. The prints continued in a straight line into a more open stretch of forest. The snow grew deeper, but the steps remained sharp and well-defined. And then they stopped. Not faded, not covered. Stopped. The final pair of prints stood perfectly side by side, toes pointing forward, as if Evan had simply stood still. Beyond them, the snow was untouched, a smooth, unbroken sheet of white stretching toward the tree line. The boy had walked straight into the open and left no tracks returning. Search leaders initially assumed a drifting snow had covered the trail. But the weather that night was calm. No wind, no shifting drifts, no movement of snow at all. The prints leading up to the final pair were crisp down to the tread pattern of Evan's boots. The prints beyond simply did not exist. For 2 days, searchers combed the woods, Volunteers marked grids, helicopters scanned thermal signatures, and dogs worked in slow, deliberate zigzags. The dogs approached the final footprints and then stopped cold, refusing to move beyond them. One whined, another backed up, tail tucked. The handler later said the dogs reacted as if they'd reached a boundary that humans could not see. On day 3, investigators discovered something resting on the stump of an old cedar tree in the clearing. Evan's compass. It sat upright, perfectly centered. Its needle spinning slowly, even though there was no nearby metal to distort it. The compass was dry, free of snow, as if someone had just set it there moments before the search team arrived. The clearing itself was untouched. No footprints surrounded the stump. A forensic technician examined the compass and noticed something unsettling. The metal of the casing felt warm to the touch despite sub-zero temperatures. Not body temperature warm, warmer. A low, steady heat that pulsed faintly like a living heartbeat. The warmth faded within minutes. When the compass was taken for analysis, the technicians found no internal source of heat, no malfunction. Nothing unusual except for faint scratches along the back, tiny, deliberate slashes that formed a pattern of parallel lines. The angle and spacing matched no known wildlife marks. The case grew stranger when the mountain rangers reviewed motion-triggered wildlife cameras along the ridge. One camera captured a single frame of something moving near the clearing around the time Evan vanished. A shape, tall, slim, human-like, but blurred in a direction inconsistent with the snow falling around it, as if it moved in a way the camera was not designed to follow. Investigators dismissed it as an artifact, but they could not explain the second anomaly, the temperature drop recorded by the same camera. Just before the frame was captured, the air temperature fell from -11 degrees to -23 in less than a second. The camera lens frosted instantly. That sudden cold spike appeared on 2 other cameras near the ridge that night, all within a 30-second window. Each spike coincided with the moment the dog teams refused to cross the final footprints. On the 5th day, a volunteer searcher found something else. A single boot print, 15 yards from the clearing, pressed into a shallow drift. It matched Evan's tread pattern, but the depth was wrong. It pressed too deeply, almost as if something heavier than a child had made the imprint using Evan's boot. The discovery broke the theory that Evan simply wandered off. It reopened a darker possibility. Something may have been walking in his place. That boot print was the last physical trace ever found. Every winter since, hikers report that the trail near the clearing feels unnaturally quiet. The air there holds a cold sharper than the surrounding forest. Some claim they hear soft crunches of footsteps behind them, pressing in the snow with steady, even rhythm. But when they turn around, there is nothing. Only the empty clearing. Only the final pair of footprints Evan left behind, and the untouched snow waiting ahead of them. Investigators still keep the compass locked in an evidence drawer. Occasionally someone checks it out for testing, and every time the same thing happens. The needle begins spinning in the heart of Halden City, where neon signs buzz through the night and alleys twist like veins. There once lived a girl named Mira Lowell. She was 9, quiet, observant, the type of child who noticed things adults dismissed. A flicker of movement where no one stood. Reflections that took a moment too long to follow their source. Lights that dimmed when someone lied. Her parents often called her camera eyes, They meant it lovingly. The world meant it literally. Because when Mira disappeared, the city's cameras captured something impossible. Mira lived with her father in an apartment on Rose Brick Levinson Street, a place where the fire escapes rattled during storms and windows glowed with soft gold from the bakery below. On a late October evening around 6:12 p.m., Mira left home carrying her small sketchbook. She told her father she wanted to sit on the building's front steps and draw the people passing after work. She had done it hundreds of times. He let her go. 6 minutes later, she was gone. Not run off, not taken in the open. Gone in the purest and most confounding sense of the word. The building's lobby camera shows Mira stepping outside with her sketchbook tucked under her arm, scarf fluttering lightly as the evening wind pushed along the street. She sat on the concrete step. She opened her sketchbook, and she began to draw. 2 minutes pass normally. Pedestrians go by. A cyclist glides through the frame. A street lamp above flickers once. Then the footage stutters. It doesn't freeze, doesn't glitch. It simply hesitates, like a breath caught between moments. During that half-second stutter, Mira's posture shifts slightly, as if someone had nudged her shoulder. No one is visible near her. When the footage resumes, Mira is no longer holding her pencil. It rests on the step beside her. She leans forward, staring intensely at something beyond the street. Her face tightens with focus, the way it does when she tries to count the tiny details on buildings she likes. Then comes the moment investigators still cannot explain. Every light in the frame, including car headlights, traffic signals, apartment windows, and the neon sign across the road, dims in a synchronized pulse. Not off, not flicker, but a soft inhaling motion of the city's glow. Mira stands. She turns directly toward the camera. Her eyes widen, and then she steps forward, into the camera. Not out of frame, not out of view, forward. Her body shifts closer to the lens, but the image distorts, stretching her form in a way that does not align with perspective. Her edges warp. Her outline shakes as if she is passing into a surface that was not meant for someone to cross. The moment her fingertips touch the lens, the image collapses into static. When the feed returns 4 seconds later, Mira is gone. Her sketchbook still sits on the step. The pencil rolls slowly in a circle, as if moved by a faint tremor in the ground. Investigators treated it as a potential abduction. They canvassed the block, searched rooftops, and interrogated residents. But the surrounding cameras show nothing unusual. Mira never walked down the street, never entered a building, never crossed an intersection. No one carried her away. She simply vanished at the instant the feed collapsed. The strange discoveries continued when detectives reviewed the sketchbook. On the page she had been drawing, Mira had sketched a simple outline of the street, the bakery sign, the street lamp, the front steps. But in the corner of the page was something she could not have seen, something that was not in the camera footage, something investigators swore did not exist on Levinson Street that evening. A tall, narrow figure with a blurred face, standing behind her, looking down. The pencil marks were frantic and layered, as if she had drawn the figure quickly, repeatedly, trying to capture a shape that refused to hold still. Forensic artists noticed another detail. Every other line in the drawing was straight and confident, but the figure's outline was shaky, segmented, almost vibrating, like Mira had drawn movement instead of form. like she was sketching something that flickered between frames. A digital forensics team enhanced the footage of the stuttered moment before the lights dimmed. In that frozen sliver, they found a trace of something on the right edge of the screen, a vertical distortion, thin as a reed, too tall to be a person, too proportioned to be a pole or sign. The technical report did not call it a being, it simply labeled it Anomaly 3B, vertical figure-like distortion. The lead investigator admitted in an interview that the distortion lined up perfectly with the figure Mira had sketched on the page. For months, the city held vigils. Mira's father hung missing posters. The police updated the public with nothing but confusion. Then on the 92nd day, something new occurred. The building's lobby camera, untouched since Mira's disappearance, flickered. A thin shape appeared in the reflection on the door. Not on the sidewalk behind it, but inside the glass itself. The reflection stepped forward, approached the lens, and for a fraction of a second the camera captured sound. Not a voice, not a scream, a child's breath, soft, faint. One exhale, then silence. When investigators replayed the footage frame by frame, they found something chilling. A smear of graphite on the camera lens. The lab later confirmed it was the same type of pencil Mira used in her sketchbook. No fingerprints, no body heat, just graphite. It was as if Mira had reached out from somewhere adjacent, somewhere close enough to touch the lens, but far enough that no one could see where she had ended up. Her case remains open. Her sketchbook sealed in evidence. The last line she drew on the outskirts of rural Greenwood County stands Briar Creek Elementary, a squat brick building with long hallways that feel a little too quiet after the final bell. For decades, the school has been ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of place where children learn multiplication tables and glue construction paper into lopsided shapes for their parents to admire. Except for the day an entire classroom saw a boy disappear right in front of them. His name was Lucas Fenwick, 10 years old, reserved, meticulous, the kind of child who sharpened all his pencils before class and lined them up like soldiers ready for inspection. He was a good kid, smart, and according to his teacher, always aware of shadows, even when no one else noticed them. The incident occurred on a fog-heavy morning in early November, when the first cold snap had crept over the county. Students were sluggish, wrapped in jackets, boots squeaking on the floors as they entered room 2C. Their teacher, Ms. Harland, had set out a simple assignment: write a descriptive paragraph about a place in the school that felt strange or interesting. Most kids wrote about the playground. A few wrote about the cafeteria. One wrote about the weird, rusty pipe behind the gym that drips even when it hasn't rained. Lucas wrote about the east hallway, the hallway no one used anymore, a long, narrow stretch that once led to an old wing of the school, shut down for renovations that were never completed. The wing had been locked for years, its windows boarded up from the inside. The janitors refused to clean it. The principal refused to elaborate. Lucas's assignment read, "The east hallway feels like a throat clearing before someone speaks. The lights buzz differently there. Sometimes the shadows don't match the things that make them. I think something is waiting past the locked door." Ms. Harlan found it imaginative, if unsettling. The day carried on as usual. No one expected what would follow. Sometime around 10:42 a.m., during independent reading, a sound echoed down the corridor outside room 2C, a scraping noise, long, slow, metal on concrete. Students turned their heads in unison as if pulled by the same thread. The second scraping sound was louder, closer, rhythmic, like something heavy being dragged. Miss Harlan stepped into the hallway to check, but saw nothing except the row of lockers and the wavering fluorescent lights that always flickered during winter. The scraping stopped. She returned to the classroom. Lucas was staring at the doorway. When she asked if he was all right, he whispered, "It's not outside." At 10:44 a.m., another sound echoed through the room. Not scraping, creaking, like an old hinge shifting its weight after decades of stillness. Every student looked up. The supply closet in room 2C, which had been shut tightly all morning, was open by 2 inches. No one had touched it. The door sat slightly ajar, dark inside, like a beckoning mouth. The metal latch, normally stiff enough to require a tug, was turned down gently, as though opened by someone with careful fingers. Miss Harlan closed it. She told the class to continue reading. They didn't. Lucas raised his hand. "It followed me," he said. Before she could ask what he meant, the supply closet door clicked open again. Not fast, not dramatic, just a slow, deliberate shift, like someone standing behind it had nudged it with their shoe. A murmur floated through the room. One student said, "I saw something move in there." Another insisted they didn't see anything at all. A third said the shadow inside the closet was shaped wrong. Ms. Harland, rattled but determined, opened the closet fully. Nothing inside except printer paper, cardboard boxes, and old project supplies. But the children weren't reassured. They all kept staring at the same spot, the far back corner where the light never fully reached. Lucas whispered, "It's waiting." And then the lights in the classroom went out. Not the whole school, not the hallway, just room 2C. Darkness swept over them in a single breath. Students screamed. Desks rattled. A flashlight beam cut across the floor from someone's phone. Children huddled together. When the lights flickered back a second later, Lucas was no longer at his desk. His reading book lay open, his pencil rolled slowly off the edge. His chair rocked once, then settled. He was gone. A fire drill was triggered. The entire school evacuated. Police swarmed the building within minutes. They assumed Lucas had run, hid, panicked, until they reviewed the classroom's ceiling-mounted camera. In the footage, the room goes dark for exactly 1.2 seconds, but the camera switches to infrared automatically. The entire room is visible. There are missing child cases built from eyewitness accounts, security footage, tire tracks, or hurried 911 calls. And then there is the case of Rowan Hale, which was built from none of those things, because Rowan disappeared while his mother was sitting right next to him. It happened in the quiet mountain town of Larchwood Ridge, a place where the night presses close to the windows and fog drapes itself across the forest floor like something sleeping. People there lock their doors early, not because the town is dangerous, but because the woods have a reputation for swallowing sound. Even long before Rowan vanished, locals whispered about things that moved between trees without making footprints. Rowan was 8 years old, small for his age, curious in a gentle way. He lived with his mother, Mara, in a cabin at the edge of the ridge, where the walls creaked from cold and the chimney occasionally exhaled sparks into the dark. Rowan loved bedtime story hour. Every night after cocoa and brushing his teeth, Mara read to him from a stack of dog-eared books. It was during one of these soft, ordinary nights that Rowan disappeared. The evening began normally. Rain pattered against the roof. Wind rustled the hemlocks. Rowan slipped under his blanket while Mara settled on the edge of the bed, storybook open. She remembered him smiling sleepily at her, a small dimple forming on his left cheek, the way it always did when he fought drowsiness. Chapter by chapter, his eyes grew heavier. Then around 8:32 p.m., something changed. Mara felt it first as a weight in the room, a quiet thickening of the air like humidity before a storm. The lamplight dimmed, not flickering, but stretching itself thin across the walls. The shadows lengthened. The room's corners seemed to lean inward. Rowan noticed it too. He looked past his mother's shoulder toward the far corner where his dresser stood. "Mama," he whispered, "it's here again." Mara turned immediately, expecting to see nothing. The usual nothing. Rowan had been mentioning the tall shadow for weeks, always pointing to the same corner. She assumed it was childhood imagination, the mental shapes that ceilings and corners tend to form at night. But this time, Mara's breath caught in her chest, because the corner was darker than it should have been. Not absence of light dark, substance dark. A thickness, a shape carved out of the negative space. And it was tall, floor to ceiling. Still, watching. She froze. Not from fear, but from an instinct older than fear itself. The instinct to not provoke whatever stands at the edge of understanding. Without taking her eyes off the corner, she slid her hand toward Rowan's, whispering, "It's all right, baby." Rowan squeezed her hand once. Then the room shifted again. The tall shadow bent. No joints, no movement. Just a downward arc like a tree trunk softening in the wind. It leaned toward the bed. The lamplight guttered. The bulb hummed sharply. The air temperature dropped so fast that Mara saw her breath fog. Rowan whispered, "Don't let it touch me." In that moment, Mara snapped into action. She grabbed her son around the waist and tried to pull him from the bed, but something else pulled back. Not a hand, not fingers, a force. Like gravity had shifted sideways and chosen Rowan as its anchor. Mara planted her feet, pulling with every ounce of strength in her body. The shadow stretched toward them, the darkness unspooling into tendrils that moved without sound. Rowan was lifted from the mattress. Not violently, not quickly, just lifted. Like a small feather caught on an unseen current. Mara screamed his name, digging her nails into his pajama fabric. The tendrils wrapped around Rowan's ankles, though they made no contact with his skin. They hovered a millimeter away, a shape mimicking touch without actually touching. As if the entity did not need physical contact to pull. Rowan's body moved horizontally across the bed toward the corner, toward the darkness, toward the tall, waiting shape. Mara yanked harder, feeling fabric tear in her hands. Rowan cried out. The shadow twitched. Then everything stopped. The lamplight surged, bright and blistering. The pressure in the room collapsed inward. The tendrils recoiled as if burned. And Rowan fell into Mara's arms. She held him, breath shuddering, heart pounding, ready to run out the door and into the night. But Rowan didn't wrap his arms around her. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. For a full second, Mara thought he had passed out from shock. Then she realized he was fading. Literally fading. His outline blurred. The edges of his pajamas flickered. Her hands began to pass through him. No, baby. Stay with me. She clutched at him, trying to hold a shape that was dissolving. The air around him filled with a low, thrumming vibration. Rowan looked up at her, eyes wide and terrified, and whispered the final words she ever heard from him. "It wants to trade places." Then he was gone, evaporated into nothing, not stolen, not carried away, unmade. Mara collapsed on the floor, screaming until her voice broke. When authorities arrived, the corner of the room was inexplicably warm. The dresser's wood grain was warped into a spiral shape, as though something had pressed against it from inside the material. Rowan's pillow was still indented where his head had been moments before, but there was no sign